Hi everyone, welcome and thanks so much for tuning into our webinar. Today we're going to talk about marketing to millennials and Gen Z consumers, focusing specifically on consumers in the US and Europe, Middle East and Africa. My name is Chase. I'm a Senior Trends Analyst at Global Web Index. I'm joined in this webinar by my colleague, Katie.
Hi everyone, my name is Katie and I'm a Senior Trends Analyst with Global Web Index. It's great to be here with you all today to discuss some really interesting insights on these two important groups for marketeers. So, on the agenda today, we're going to first talk a little bit about who we are here at Global Web Index and what we do. We'll define our groups a little bit and get that background out of the way. And then we'll jump right into the 4 trends to watch for when marketing to millennials and Gen Z. We'll talk about the importance of mobile, the rise of video and entertainment content, eco-conscious consumerism, and the role of influencers in marketing. I'll now let Chase give you all a quick intro into Global Web Index and what we do.
Thanks, Katie. So Global Web Index is a consumer profiling company. Now, along with many other products, we run the world's largest ongoing study into the digital consumer. We now survey more than 440,000 different internet users aged 16 to 64 across 45 markets around the world each year. This research is representative of around 2.6 billion internet users. Now, on every one of these respondents, we're able to cross-analyze more than 25,000 different data points, building an unparalleled understanding of the modern digital consumer. So we do this to investigate their digital lives, from their demographics, attitudes and interests, to their online activities, social media usage, media consumption, and brand engagement, among many other qualities as well.
What we provide at Global Web Index is really an end-to-end solution for researchers, agencies, marketeers, and really any industry professionals looking to do things like segment and profile their audience, use robust data to craft the right messaging, learn how to engage and reach their customers through our analysis tools, and measure the effectiveness of their initiatives and campaigns. Alongside this ongoing research that we provide through our core set, we also run frequent bespoke custom research studies which allow us to deep dive into different trends and topical areas of interest. We'll use some of the insights from a bespoke study later on in this webinar. So now that you guys know a little bit more about Global Web Index, who we are and what sort of solutions we offer, we're going to jump right into the heart of this webinar. Today, we're talking about 2 very important and quite different groups for marketeers, Millennials and Generation Z.
So there are many definitions online of who a millennial is, but generally speaking, they were born in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And from our research, we defined them as anyone aged between 22 to 35. Their younger counterparts, Generation Z, are defined as anyone aged between 16 to 21. We're going to focus on these audiences, looking at the US and the Europe, Middle East and Africa regions specifically. So for many years now, millennials have been a key audience for brands and marketers. However, this is beginning to change as Generation Z are poised to take center stage. A recent statistic from Bloomberg revealed that Generation Z will comprise 32% of the global online population in 2019, nudging ahead of millennials who will account for around a 31.5% share.
That's right, and while millennials remain an important group for brands and marketeers, the attention that has long been placed upon them is now also being shared with their younger counterparts, who have immense buying power and will continue to do so going forward. At first glance, Gen Zs and millennials can appear quite similar. However, there are unique differences that we will highlight throughout, which is key for marketing to these groups.
Thanks, Katie. So to kick us off, we're going to begin by looking at the role that mobile plays in the lives of these generations. Now, from our data, we can see that both generations across Europe, Middle East and Africa and the US are spending over 3 hours on mobile per day. And Generation Zs are spending the most time on mobile, particularly in Europe, Middle East and Africa, where mobile takes around 4 hours and 6 minutes per day on average. Now, this is partly due to high mobile ownership rates across these generations, and the fact that the EMEA markets have mobile ownership rates between 96 and 98%, ahead of ownership of all other devices.
However, when we look at time spent on laptops, we can see that for US Gen Zs and Millennials, the laptop remains key, with them spending more time on laptops than mobiles, over 4 hours for both Gen Zs and Millennials per day. The US sees more importance placed on laptops because they typically first got online through these devices, and it is very much ingrained within their lifestyle.
Well, essentially, mobile usage is not taking away any time being spent on laptops or PCs per se. It's simply adding another screen that can be used on the go. So marketers and brands must therefore adopt an omni-channel approach that is optimized for both mobile and laptops in order to reach these younger audiences, because they expect a seamless transition between devices. So really, brands need to get that right. Having said that, the majority of Gen Zs and millennials across these markets say that the smartphone is actually their most important device for getting in line overall. But we do see differences across these markets, with over 3/4 of EMEA Gen Zs saying that their smartphone is their most important device, compared to over 60% of US Gen Zs and around 56% of US millennials.
Thanks, Chase. When we turn our attention to their attitudes to technology, it's clear that both generations are always connected with tech and find it really difficult to switch off. So much so that over 60% of both generations across markets agree that they are constantly connected online, and they over-index for this compared to the average user. In the US, over half, and in EMEA, it's close to half of users say that they feel more insecure without their mobile phone than their wallet. They also over-index compared to the average user for saying that it's critical for them to be contactable at all times in terms of their private life. There is a noticeable internal conflict for millennials when it comes to technology. While they say they are constantly connected online and that they feel insecure without their mobile, they are much more likely than Gen Zs and the average user to say that they don't understand new technology or that technology complicates their lives. More millennials also say they feel there is too much choice online, which can easily lead to feeling overwhelmed.
Well, that might be partly because millennials grew up during a period of rapid technological, economic, and societal change. They're the generation that pioneered social media, but they also struggle between their desire to be constantly connected and their concerns over the impact technology has on their daily lives. So whereas Gen Z, they're the first generation to grow up with digital platforms and technology at their fingertips and have never known a world without it. For example, many Gen Zs have owned smartphones as young as elementary or middle school, compared to millennials, many of whom didn't own a laptop or phone growing up and didn't get one until high school or even university.
And when we look at their online mobile activities within the past month, we can see that EMEA is largely focused around social media activities and messaging. Visiting and using a social network takes the #1 spot, with 96% of EMEA Gen Zs and 91% of EMEA millennials visiting or using a social network in the past month. Social media plays a key role in both markets. Gen Zs across markets are also much more likely to engage with video and entertainment content than the average user. For example, they over-index significantly in EMEA for using a music streaming service and watching vlogs. We'll touch on this point in more detail a little bit later on.
When we look at US online mobile activities, social media and video content is a key again, as Katie's already mentioned. But we are seeing a movement towards commerce and product research activities in the US. So around 3/4 of Gen Z and millennials have visited an online retail site like Amazon in the past month. And around 70% of Gen Z and around 2/3 of millennials have searched for a product or service they want to buy. To add to this, more than 1/3 of Gen Zs and millennials across each markets have used a voice search tool like Siri in the past month, which presents an opportunity for voice assistant commerce activities, obviously. We've talked about this before, but voice-driven commerce is specifically for regular purchase categories like groceries. These categories really don't require much research or screen time, and that, as such, could really be where voice tech will make its stamp. And our data shows that around 1/5 of all internet users are currently using a voice-controlled assistant or smart speaker, and more than 1/3 of internet users plan to purchase one in the next 6 months. So the opportunities for voice-driven commerce could be huge if that potential is fully realized.
Yeah, and when we dig a little deeper, we can see the US is one of the biggest users of Amazon, showing just how popular the company is over there. In general, online shopping is big in the US, with over 65% of US Gen Z millennials having used a shopping app in the past month. And more than half of these have used the Amazon Commerce app in the past month, compared to just over 20% of EMEA Gen Zs and millennials. Going back to Chase's point about voice commerce, Amazon is well placed to own the space and is making really big efforts to do so via its Alexa devices. This type of retail strategy is prompting many other retailers to also partner with voice tech partners, and we don't see this slowing down anytime soon.
Nice. I think it's worth looking at the purchase journey for these consumers. So our data shows that mobile plays a significant role in the purchase journey, from researching and buying products to leaving reviews as well. So while mobile is in first place with purchasing products, laptops actually aren't that far behind, with around half of US Gen Z and millennials purchasing products via their laptop in the past month. And again, this reiterates the importance of a multi-device strategy.
And when it comes to product research, social networks plays a really big role in this, particularly for EMEA, with over half of Gen Z and millennials using a social network ahead of search engines to find out information about products and services.
Yeah, and to add to that, we can see that customer reviews are also key in product research, particularly in the US, with around 40% of Gen Z and millennials saying that they use customer reviews to find out more information about products or services. And this is important because for brands, both generations are more easily swayed by other people's opinions, and they value their peers' respect more so too. And that makes them prime audiences for influencer marketing, which we're actually going to touch on later on. So this puts more pressure on brands and marketers to get their offering and communication both offline and online spot on to effectively reach these groups. And this is reiterated by the fact that 2 in 5 millennials and Gen Zs in the US say that reviews from other customers would increase their likelihood of buying a product. They take reviews seriously, so promoting an open and honest dialogue online is absolutely crucial.
Thanks for that, Chase. As you all might have already picked up, we alluded to the whole idea of younger internet users' consumption of entertainment content, especially for things like music and video, a few times in this last section. We're going to explore that in greater detail now and look at how brands could potentially tap into this growing social media use case to really target younger consumers across the US and EMEA in ways that most naturally resonate with them. So the best place to start, perhaps, is at the broadest level, looking at how entertainment consumption has become a key motivator for younger consumers, especially among Gen Z, for using social media. In the US, 57% of Gen Zs report that they use social media to find funny or entertaining content, making this motivator the #1 reason that Gen Z use social media in that market. In comparison, the vast majority of internet users, including millennials in the US, name staying in touch with what my friends are doing as their #1 reason for being on social media.
Well, we see a similar pattern for EMEA too, with more than half of Gen Zs reporting that the main reason they use social media is to find funny or entertaining content. Now, interestingly, however, the #1 reason Gen Zs in EMEA use social media is actually to fill up spare time. So while there's a lot of crossover with filling up spare time and looking for entertainment, it actually points to some nuanced differences between EMEA Gen Zs and US Gen Zs. EMEA Gen Zs might see social as more of a time filler and could be slightly less inclined to actively look for content they want to consume, versus US Gen Zs who really prioritize finding entertainment content.
We're now going to look at some of the specific types of entertainment content that younger internet users are consuming. And by doing so, we can really see where the trend towards video is coming through. You can see that almost all Gen Zs in both the US and EMEA, 97% and 98% respectively, are watching video clips or visiting video sharing sites on a regular basis. This is similarly very high for millennials, but dips quite a bit when including internet users of all ages.
Yeah, and you can really start to see the Gen Z mentality towards video distinctly emerge when you look at something a bit more niche, such as vlogs, for example. So more than half of all Gen Zs in the US and EMEA report watching a vlog in the last month. Now, this is nearly 10 percentage points more than the number of millennials who report doing so, and in the case of EMEA, nearly 20 percentage points more than the norm. It's also quite interesting to look at it from this perspective, from an influencer perspective. And we'll talk more about that later on in the webinar. So nearly a third of Gen Zs in both the US and Europe, Middle East and Africa are following vloggers on social media. And this is really a significant portion of younger internet users. And it represents an important mechanism for how brands can leverage video in an effective way.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Chase. We can talk about the rise of entertainment content and video in abstract terms. But really, when you look at a data point like this, you can start to see some real direction emerge as to what are the mechanisms that brands can use to leverage this trend. Vloggers are becoming important for this marketing strategy in areas like beauty, health, and fitness, and are likely to become even more so in other industries as the trend towards video expands. We're going to look at a few other examples of where specific video and entertainment content consumption are growing among these cohorts next.
So staying on the topic of vloggers, it's definitely YouTube, which is the main platform to access this type of content. Across internet users generally, YouTube is actually one of the top 1 or 2 social media platforms, both in terms of visitation and engagement. When we look at a specific action like watching celebrity or vlogger videos on YouTube, we're seeing this behavior to be most popular among Gen Z, especially in the US. However, it is growing steadily for millennials, and when looking at EMEA, the gap between the two cohorts is even smaller. This indicates that for brands who want to leverage the vlogger content as part of a marketing strategy, there will be more opportunity to speak to a broader audience rather than just the youngest of internet users over time, and especially in EMEA.
That's really interesting, Chase, and definitely something to keep an eye on in EMEA. Another example of specific consumption trends, behaviors we're going to take a look at next is on Instagram. So Instagram introduced a stories feature in late 2016, and this feature really epitomizes a lot of what this trend is all about. It has provided users with a mechanism to both share and consume bite-sized visual content, a lot of which is video across a really popular platform. With this in mind, it's not surprising to see how usage of the feature has increased dramatically among young Instagram users, especially Gen Z, and especially in the US. Enthusiasm for the feature has been slightly lower among Gen Zs in EMEA, though it's still growing considerably.
Yeah, and this pattern is even more noteworthy when you look at how other behaviors on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or other social media platforms have changed over time. So in general, we've seen a decline in how much social media users, especially in the US and EMEA, but also at a global level as well, are willing to share about themselves on social media. There's been a movement towards more private online spaces like messaging apps. So when you see a feature like this gaining popularity in the face of a broader shift to more private uses of social media, is actually especially relevant. And we see that Instagram has been embraced by brands who do use very snackable bits of content on stories to engage users in a relevant way. So it's definitely something that is effective, and it will likely become more strategically important.
So we've looked at a couple of behaviors around video and entertainment content that are clearly trending among Gen Z and millennials. But now we'd like to get even more specific, down to whether video and entertainment content has a role to play in how these young internet users are interacting with brands. When looking at what type of actions millennials and Gen Z users have done online recently to interact with brands, you can see a very clear preference for video-based interaction among Gen Z. Gen Zs are more likely to watch a video made by a brand than they are to read an email newsletter, visit a brand's social media page, or follow a brand on social media. In fact, for Gen Z, watching branded video content is the #2 most frequently reported online interaction with brands, second only to visiting a brand's website.
Well, the same can't be said for millennials, where in the US, they're still quite interested in online newsletter content, or in EMEA, where they're more inclined to directly follow brands on their social media pages. Now, this is a really crucial piece of information that not only further reinforces this trend towards video, but gives a clear direction to brands that effective engagement with Gen Z can really come from video above all.
Yeah, and as Chase already mentioned, it is sort of a clear point of direction that branded video content is an important means for engaging with Gen Z. The last thing that I want to talk about in this section is advocacy and the role of this type of content for further promoting advocacy among young internet users. In the US, nearly 1 in 4 Gen Zs say that they would be motivated to promote their favorite brand if it provided exclusive access to music, video, and other type of content for them. While slightly lower, at about 1 in 5 Gen Z users, the trend holds through among Gen Z in EMEA as well. In contrast, the norm for this type of attitude is only at about 13% among all internet users in both regions.
That's really quite a difference. We've talked about branded videos, we've talked about vloggers, we've also talked about Instagram stories, and this is really another very concrete example of how brands can capitalize on the trend towards video and entertainment content to really drive engagement. So in this case, it's to drive advocacy among Gen Z, which is a huge thing, especially when, as we mentioned in the earlier section, so many young consumers are using recommendations online and reviews online to make purchasing decisions. It's really just another way to cement that relationship with a brand.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so we've talked a bit about some very digital and social media focused trends in marketing towards Gen Z and millennials. We're going to pivot a little bit now and address a trend that is a bit more relevant in real life. The trend we're going to talk about is eco-consumerism, which is really just the rise of consumers, especially younger consumers, having a concern for the global environment and also having a level of demand that brands and companies do something meaningful to make a positive impact in this space.
So we're going to first look at one of the key motivations that is driving this trend towards eco-consumerism, which is quite obviously a concern for the global environment. In our core research, we ask our respondents a lot of attitudinal questions to try to get an insight into their view of the world and their deeper priorities. So when looking at how many of our respondents agree with the statement, "I feel positive about the future of the environment," it's pretty clear that the youngest generation has the worst outlook on this. The difference among generations is most stark when we look at the US, where only around 27% of Generation Zs have a positive outlook on the future of the environment, compared to around 37% of millennials.
That really is quite stark, Chase. Though that 27% figure is the same for Gen Zs in EMEA, it doesn't feel quite as severe because it looks like across generations in EMEA, there's less optimism towards the future of the environment anyways. This does correspond to a lot of things that we know that are different about life and the attitudes towards environmentalism in these two areas. There is definitely less of a culture promoting environmentalism and conservation in the US than in most European countries.
Yeah, and there are definitely some cultural differences there. So we've established that Generation Z consumers, especially in the US, are the least optimistic about the future of the environment. But when we look at which generation is most inclined to actually do something about that when it comes to how their own personal shopping behaviors affect environmental issues, it's actually millennials in the US who are leading the way and taking direct action. So more than half of US millennials agree that they would pay for more sustainable or eco-friendly products, compared to just under half of Generation Zs in the US and around just over 40% of all US internet users.
Yeah, that's quite a difference. And it obviously speaks to the fact that not only is a concern for the environment more common among younger people in the US, but the willingness to actually act with your wallet is significantly more pronounced among younger people. This same pattern across generations is seen in EMEA, but definitely to a much lower degree. Again, pointing to the fact that there is a broader culture of environmentalism and conservation in EMEA that is just not as big in the US.
Right, it definitely is. And this difference among generations in the US is important for brands to keep in mind. Targeting Gen Z and millennials with messaging that focuses on the eco-friendly benefits of products or services can be quite effective, as this is obviously becoming more and more of a priority. However, it is important for brands to think about the rest of the audience in that market who might not be as concerned with this issue and avoid coming off to them as irrelevant or not relatable.
Right, it's totally a balance when trying to engage younger consumers without potentially isolating the rest of the market. That lets us transition really nicely into another point of conversation where we really want to stress the balance between eco-friendliness and other priorities for younger consumers. So we know that for both Gen Z and millennials, environmentalism is becoming more of a priority, and there is a willingness to pay more for products and brands that really take a stand in that direction. However, it's certainly not the be-all and end-all of what they're looking for. And this is evident when we look at what different generations of internet users report are the top things they want their favorite brands to do or provide for them. It's quite interesting because among US Gen Zs, they actually prioritize brands that make them feel cool or trendy rather than producing eco-friendly goods.
Well, here we see this difference between the US and EMEA coming through again. But while trendiness is more of a priority for Gen Zs than older groups in EMEA, it is on the whole less important than brands making people feel cool or trendy. versus producing eco-friendly products. Now, this speaks to important cultural differences that we've touched on before, but it also speaks to the need to balance, especially in the US, a marketing strategy of promoting eco-friendliness at the potential expense of coolness or trendiness, which is quite paramount for Gen Z consumers.
It's really interesting, yeah. And we are also seeing that key differences between young US and EMEA consumers come through a lot here. And it's an important one for brands who are invested in eco-friendly products or services to remember. So, moving on to the last bit of this section, we're going to look at how eco-conscious Gen Z and millennials are researching products. So we know the whole eco-friendly, organic, natural movement has focused a lot on both food and personal care products. To get a sense of which type of these products eco-conscious millennials and Gen Z consumers are scrutinizing more heavily, we looked into what they're researching before they purchase. The results here point to some interesting differences. As to be expected, young eco-conscious consumers across both the US and EMEA are over-indexing pretty heavily in how much they research both food and personal care products prior to purchase, but a few key differences do emerge.
Well, they're quite interesting. So firstly, eco-conscious Gen Zs in the US are doing more research than their EMEA counterparts when purchasing makeup or cosmetics. We know from our earlier slides that Gen Zs in the US are the most environmentally concerned, so that does make sense. An additional factor could be related to the differences in regulation in the US versus Europe. So in the EU, over 1,000 chemical ingredients have been banned from personal care products due to the potential safety risks. But in the US, on the other hand, the figure is actually much smaller. So in comparison, it's around 30 or so.
Right, and there are also similar differences in how food additives are regulated in the US versus in the EU, with a lot of preservatives and food processing ingredients that are allowed in the US being banned in the EU. It's interesting, though, that eco-conscious consumers in the US don't seem to be doing quite as much research into snack foods as their EMEA counterparts, although they are still doing quite a bit. This general tendency to over-index in researching these type of goods has implications for companies and brands who want to market themselves in this way for young eco-conscious consumers. Having a higher level of transparency and information available to both US and EMEA consumers might be necessary in order to satisfy their need for deeper scrutiny of their products.
Right, exactly. And another thing that's quite interesting from this slide is the difference between eco-conscious millennial and Gen Z consumers in the US. So in the US, Gen Zs are actually more likely to research makeup and skincare products, whereas millennials are more likely to be researching snack foods and especially coffee.
Right, and coffee is quite a big one. It is likely related to a degree to the fact that Gen Zs are younger and are probably spending less money on their own food purchases when compared with millennials. A lot of Gen Zs are probably still living with their parents or on college campuses. But the cosmetics one is really interesting. We've definitely seen an increase in more natural-based cosmetics products and companies. And I think brands in this space will have to continue to respond to the obvious concerns and demands of young eco-conscious consumers for more transparency, availability, and choice.
Yeah, it's definitely something we would advise brands to watch out for. Moving on to our next section, now we're going to look at the last trends to watch among Gen Zs and millennials, influencer marketing.
Thanks so much, Chase. So we know that influencers are increasingly becoming a part of brand campaigns and shows no signs of slowing down. Take a look at the average Instagram feed and there's sure to be a few celebrities or influencers endorsing certain products. When done right, using influencers can offer brands the opportunity to create more human, real, and personal connections with their audience, which goes way beyond traditional advertising. We will now take a look at the impact of influencer marketing on Gen Z and millennials and where there is most potential. So using our core data again, we can see that across EMEA and the US, over 1 in 4 Gen Z millennials say their main reason for using social media is to follow celebrities and celebrity news. Gen Zs across regions are much more likely than the average user to use social media for this reason. The likes of Snapchat and Instagram stories have been effective channels for many influencers wanting to send out a brief message to their following on a really personal level.
But it's also a prominent reason for millennials too, with around a fifth doing the same. So in the US and EMEA, the top 3 celebrity influencers that these generations follow are singers, musicians and bands, actors and comedians. So in the US, Generation Z are well over 100% more likely to follow vloggers than the average internet user. Now this is helped by the fact that Gen Zs engage with video platforms like YouTube and Snapchat. US millennials are around 40% more likely to follow entrepreneurs and business people than the average user, reflecting where they are in their life stage. So almost 40% of Gen Zs and millennials say that they would buy a product or service simply for the experience of being a part of the community built around it. Influencer marketing not only provides entertaining and easily consumed content to a group who are admittedly more easily influenced, but it also taps into that community connection that they desire. So in August of this year, we actually carried out a bespoke influencer marketing survey in the US and the UK. But we're going to now cover those findings from Gen Zs and millennials.
Thanks, Chase. So when we take a look at the top sites used to follow celebrities and influencers, we can see that YouTube is in top place for both generations. Gen Z are also more active in each of the platforms except for Facebook, where it's actually the second most used site for millennials. This is partly because millennials have been engaging with Facebook since the very beginning, and also because Gen Zs are used to having lots of different and newer platforms to play with. And they also value more private, bite-sized content where they can have more control over who they share with. Instagram was a close second favorite for Gen Zers, which makes sense considering the nature of Instagram lends itself well to this type of marketing. Its swipe up features lets influencers direct followers straight to purchase options, while Stories provides a window into creators' worlds and helps make them more relatable.
So in terms of the top categories followed, we can see that gaming, fashion, and beauty are the top categories for Gen Zs. Now for millennials, it's fashion, food, and beauty. When we break this down by gender, we can see that gaming is pretty big for male Gen Zs, and it's their #1 category followed. From our core survey, our data shows that Gen Zs are more likely to buy a mobile game than the average internet user, and they're also more likely to be gaming across most devices in general. So this presents an opportunity for gaming brands to leverage, particularly in terms of finding innovative ways to integrate into games and live streams of these games on sites like Twitch.
For female Gen Zs and millennials, the top category they follow is beauty. An example of a beauty brand that uses influencer marketing really well is Glossier, a Manhattan-based cosmetic startup. The company doesn't use high-profile people in its campaigns. Instead, it chooses to focus on super fans of the brand or micro-influencers. They say they like to rely on regular women to spread the word and like the idea of every woman being an influencer. What's really interesting from our findings is that male millennials relate more to influencers than females or male Gen Zs, which helps shatter a common misconception that it's mainly women who follow and relate to influencers online. We can see that 78% of male millennials say that they seek out expert opinions before making a purchase. And over half say they relate to influenced opinions more than product experts, and that influencers affect their purchase decisions. While millennial males relate to the most to influencers, Gen Z males are still ahead of females in this regard too. This suggests that influencer marketing has greater impact among males in general.
Well, one of the major issues with influencer marketing is trust and authenticity. Although around 40% of Gen Zs and just under half of millennials say that they trust celebrities they follow to make unbiased and trustworthy recommendations, it's actually slightly less Gen Zs and significantly less millennials who actually don't feel this way. When we break this down by gender, we can see that male millennials are more trusting, which makes sense considering that they are most impacted by influencers in general. And seeing as a considerable amount of these generations distrust influencers, brands really need to carefully consider the type of influencer they want to partner with. Each influencer comes with their own brand image and their own audience too, which needs to fit together nicely with the company's brand.
For brands to truly succeed in this space, the relationship with consumers needs to be built on transparency in order to secure their trust. The importance of open and honest communication cannot be overestimated here. Our data shows that over 3 in 4 Gen Z millennials agree that followers of celebrities should be informed if they are paid to promote a product or brand online. There shouldn't be any reason to hide this, and there's only positive benefits that can result in being open and honest. In the UK and the US, they've introduced ad guidelines to regulate the process and make it clear when promotions are paid for posts.
Overall, these younger consumers, these younger generations are actually more brand savvy and are suspicious of inauthentic advertising and can quickly see through the smokescreens. So ad blocking is a frequent activity for Gen Zs and millennials, mainly due to ad fatigue. However, influencer marketing offers a way of overcoming traditional ad frustrations, especially if it can be a source of entertainment or education for younger generations.
Yeah, that's a really great point there, Chase. And a lot of what we've mentioned ties in well to our other trends like mobile and the rise of video and entertainment content. So it's great to see how the data can really build a bigger picture for brands and marketeers.
Absolutely. So we've covered a good bit through this webinar across some pretty varied topics. Hopefully you'll find all of this quite interesting and helpful. So thanks very much for listening. If you have any questions on the content of this webinar, or if you're keen to discuss anything else further, please drop us a note at trends@globalwebindex.com. And these details are also available on the Global Web Index page you used to access this webinar. A reminder that we are also offering a free 14-day trial to our platform, which you can sign up to via the webinar page, and the ability to sign up opens now until 7th of December.